If you are 1-3 or 0-4, this video is for you because a lot of us have fantasy teams not performing how we thought they would. There are certain steps you can take, though, to try to recover and still win your fantasy league. I have seen it happen, but let's go into what it takes to actually fix a fantasy team that looks awful so far this season. It's a lot of strategy, right? We're going to give you a lot of strategy suggestions here. So the first question you have to ask yourself when you're considering blowing up or rebuilding your fantasy team is, am I actually that bad? Because a lot of times, as you know, luck is a very important factor in fantasy football. And it is possible to get either really lucky or really unlucky in this case in fantasy football. And it completely skew how you should be viewing your team. Let's take the Flock League, for example. In the Flock League going into this week, Badaki was 1-2. You know Badaki from Fantasyland. He was 1-2. And it looked like he could potentially go 1-3. All it took was one bad week. He's going to end up going to 2-2. But Badaki, even though he was 1-2, when you're looking at the standings, he was 7th in the league in standings. He was 2nd in points for, right? And so what that tells me and what it should tell him is that his team is much better than his record shows. When you're looking at his points against, and you can sort by this on Sleeper, you can see it in your league. Badaki is 2nd in the league in points against, meaning that although his team has been very good, other teams against him in particular weeks have also been very good, causing him to lose a couple games. So even though he's 2-2 now, we're not super duper concerned about that. You can find examples of this in any league, but the main thing is going to be look at your points for. If you are a top 4 team in points for, you're doing something right regardless of your record. You're going to have 1-3 and 0-4 teams in rare occasions that are top 4 in points for, which is, again, the total points you scored all season. The other thing to look at, again, even if you are like anywhere from probably 4-8 or 5-8, is if you are 0-3, or 0-4 or 1-3, and you look at your points for, and you're not even, you're top 6 in points for, but you're top 2 or 3 in points against, you've just gotten unlucky. And I don't think that warrants blowing it up and rebuilding your fantasy team. So here's how you know when you actually have to rebuild your fantasy team. Because it also goes the other way. When you're looking at the standings this is from last week, before this week's games for the Flock League, you have Mason in 6th place, right? So you're thinking he's 2-1. He's going to be 3-1 after this week. You're thinking Mason's team, he's feeling good about it, right? When you sort by points for, Mason is 11th in the league in points for. 11th. Probably a little bit higher than that after the results process for this week, but this is after last week. 11th in points for, and points against, he's 10th. So it means he's not scored a lot of points, but he's gotten really lucky and nobody scored points against him. This is an example of the other type of team. You actually need to rebuild this team, right? You actually should be making moves on this team. And anybody who follows the Flock League, which you should subscribe if you haven't, anybody who follows that league knows that his team is garbage and he's probably not going to do anything. So it goes both ways. Here's what you need to look at. When you sort by points for and max points for, am I a top 4 or 5 team? If you are, you're probably looking pretty good. If you're not, regardless of what your record is, you're in trouble, and that's when you need to rebuild. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. And I think one way that we do that, and I think one of the most important ways, is to trade just as much as possible.
Yeah, you want to be trading literally all the time, and that generally is going to include down tiers. There are specific trades that we want you to make. Don't just ship off all of the remaining relevant assets that you have on your team and go up tier. If you're one of the worst teams, that means you probably have some of the worst depth as well. Not great flex options. You're hurting at all of the one position areas like quarterback and tight end. You're probably bottom of the pack there as well. Down tier, like just absolute nuts. If you have an elite running back like a Breece Hall, like a Bijan Robinson, like a Jonathan Taylor, like a dare I even say Saquon Barkley, like you want to be down tiering from those guys, getting a productive running back plus a viable flex option on top, right? If you have someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you have someone like A.J. Brown, if you have someone like Debo, you want to be down tiering from those guys and getting a productive mid-range wide receiver plus probably a flexible running back. I honestly, another thing that I'm just going to add and tag onto this is don't go and target a perceived elite tight end in this landscape right now. If you are a team that is absolutely awful, that's 0-3, 1-4, and you're trying to salvage your team.
And I think Nathan nailed it. I think you have to prioritize running back and wide receiver, and you have to prioritize specifically guys at those positions that have upside, because you're not going to go out. And here's the thing. the thing we know for sure about your team is your team isn't good enough. And if that's the case, it means that the value of your team or the trade capital that you have for your fantasy football team is not enough to where you can go out and get guys that are actually going to guaranteed win you championships. Nobody's going to trade those guys to you, and you don't have the resources to buy them. And so what you have to bet on is you have to bet on guys that you know have the upside to win fantasy football leagues, but they haven't performed that way so far, right? And so when I'm talking about upside, I'm talking about somebody like Tank Dell. Tank Dell's a guy you know has a ton of upside, right? And personally, in any other situation, am I telling people to buy Tank Dell? No. No, I am not. I looking at his targets, six targets, 4 targets, 7 targets, 8 points, 2 points, 11 points. He has been widely disappointing considering the price he was drafted at. With Tank Dell, he's super cheap and he's an upside shot. Why? Because he is one injury away from doing what he did last year. And what he did last year was he was a wide receiver 1 when he was on the field, or a wide receiver 2, even a high-end wide receiver 2. I mean, the dude was producing 28, 18, 29, 17 points, 25 points, 20 points. He was ridiculous, but he has this upside as a talent, as a player, and the situation also still bears that upside. And so, yeah, Tank Dell's not somebody I'm recommending everybody go get. But if you're somebody with a terrible team, it might be somebody you have to go get. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about upside. I'm talking about Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Christian McCaffrey. You get him derp cheap right now. That's something that I think you go do because, again, it's your only chance of winning. You think about it, if you continue on the track that you do, you are almost certainly not going to make the playoffs. Only about half teams make the playoffs in most leagues, right? And if you're still bottom 4 or 5 in points for, you're trending towards not making the playoffs. So, again, upside is going to be everything. Guys that possess a lot of upside are going to be, again, proven guys in good situations. Rookies have a lot of upside because there are so many unknowns around them. And there are cases where you see rookies not really step into their role and produce until later in the year, right? And so that's going to be a position that has high upside. Most of these guys, again, are going to be wide receivers here, but we're going to give you some specific targets later in the video. But you'll notice that all of these guys have upside. They all have performed not so great so far this year. And because of that, they're cheaper. And that's why you can afford them with your bad team, is because they're cheaper. But we have to target upside. And so let's go through some targets for your rebuilding teams now. I'll let you start with the first one here outside of Tank Dell, and that's actually going to be Michael Pittman.
Yeah, Michael Pittman has had an incredibly disappointing start to this season, but then he finally showed what he's capable of doing and has been capable of doing the last couple of years on a Colts offense where they give him a lot of targets, right? He was finally able to capitalize, has over 100 receiving yards, puts up like 17, 18 points in PPR formats. You're like, okay, that is what we wanted to see. That's exactly what we wanted to see. It is pretty hysterical that he was able to do that pretty much the second that Anthony Richardson walked off the field and Joe Flacco was throwing him the ball. So that's something that you want to take into account. But here's a couple things that you want to consider. Again, as a desperate team, number one, you can either hope that Anthony Richardson keeps missing some games, which historically speaking is possible, right? And number two, you can hope that Pittman can start to produce with Anthony Richardson on the field, which we got a little bit of a glimpse of that before Anthony Richardson went down. If you remember in the first quarter of the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, one of the best defenses in the NFL, Michael Pittman dropped I think dang near half of those points with Anthony Richardson throwing him the ball because they started taking some shots with Pittman instead of just freaking Alec Pierce 60 yards down the field.
Right.
So it was encouraging to see, and you're starting to have a little glimmer of hope with Michael Pittman and what his upside could be, what we expected it to be when we were initially drafting him in the 4th and 5th round, and that's definitely not his price right now.
Yeah.
You can get him for a lot cheaper, and if he's able to finally bounce back and do what we thought he could do, then you're looking at a big time value payoff.
I'm going to go ahead and combat some of the things I know people are going to say about this video because again, we can't make you understand this, but a lot of people are going to say, why would you trade away CeeDee Lamb? Why would you trade away Tyreek Hill? Why would you trade away Amon-Ra St. Brown and Justin Jefferson? Because if you are that bad, if you're a bottom 3 team in points for and you have those guys on your team, it doesn't matter that you have those guys on your team. Those guys are going to rot on your roster. Your team is that bad that you have to down tier to guys that you could maybe get and plug in at 2 positions instead of just 1. You've got to go for upside at multiple positions to try to save your fantasy team. A lot of people are going to say these targets are awful. Tank Dell, Michael Pittman, who would buy these guys? Pickens, J.K. Dobbins, Shaheed.
That's kind of the point.
You don't have the capital. If your team's this bad, you don't have the capital to go buy really good guys. You have to shoot for bad guys. These guys have been bad. That's the whole point. Yep. Otherwise, they wouldn't be cheap.
But that's the encouraging thing about it being the first 4 weeks of the season is the reason we're telling you to go target players like this is because the first 4 weeks of the season doesn't reflect the last 12 to 13 weeks of the season, right? You have guys that just take a little bit of time to break out and to do what you thought they were capable of doing in the preseason. It just takes a little bit of time.
And the same is true for your fantasy team. The problem is you're at a severe disadvantage already if you're 1-3 or 0-4. Yeah. So you can't wait for those breakouts to happen. It might be too late. You've got to move. And so let's talk about another guy here, Cooper Kupp. I already mentioned this. It came out today or yesterday that he's going to be out at least 2 more weeks, and then they have the bye week. So you're talking about week 7 before he's on the field. Mm-hmm. And again, when he's on the field, when he's healthy, he's a league winner. How cheap is he right now? I don't know. It's going to depend on your league mates. Again, in more casual leagues, you might have people trade Cooper Kupp for super cheap. And that's something you do as a team that is 1-3, 0-4. You try to scrape by until he gets back week 7. Again, it may be too late, but that's why you have to make multiple moves. You have to make as many trades as possible. Cooper Kupp has league winning upside. He could be cheaper because of the injury.
Yep. Brandon Aiyuk is another guy who, I was pretty low on Brandon Aiyuk going into the season. His price ended up actually being reasonable because he started falling to like early 3rd, even mid 3rd, sometimes as late as that. But initially he was going mid to late 2nd, and that was a bit high for a guy that only had like 105 targets last year. We had to say, we said that his volume had to go up if he was going to be able to really pay off at price. And that hasn't really shown yet this season. Now, he's coming off of a huge contract, right? That he sat out all of the offseason to get paid. And I will say, of all the guys on this list that we have, Brandon Aiyuk is one of the guys that you can probably get incredibly cheap, and I'm pretty confident he's going to be able to outproduce by miles what he's done through the first 4 games of the season, because he did not do anything in the offseason. He didn't practice. He didn't build chemistry with that offense. He didn't reestablish chemistry with all the players, right? It just, there were so many things going into the season that indicated that Brandon Aiyuk was going to start slow. And I think you have seen rock bottom for Brandon Aiyuk at this point. You've seen him play alongside Juwan Jennings without Deebo Samuel, CMC, and George Kittle not do anything. You've seen him be outproduced now by Juwan Jennings for 2 straight weeks, and Deebo Samuel coming off of a calf injury. It's go time for Brandon Aiyuk, and he better figure it out. And this is where I think you can capitalize as a team that's desperate, because while I think there's apparent, very clear risk with taking Brandon Aiyuk, he has never been cheaper, and I honestly think this is probably one of the last opportunities you're going to get Aiyuk at this price right now.
On the same note, you have Garrett Wilson, who is the wide receiver 36 so far on the season. And a lot of people are going to look at that and say, this isn't sustainable. A lot of people are freaking out about Garrett Wilson. Trust me, we've seen it in our comments. We see it every day on the Discord. We talk to thousands of people that play fantasy football, guys. A lot of people are freaking out about Garrett Wilson. And Wilson's a guy who's getting 8.5 targets a game. So I don't really care. Between the targets and the fact that I know he has some crazy upside. I'm chasing the talent here, right? The talent of Garrett Wilson, which hasn't been lost. He's still got the talent, and he's getting the volume. He's got a really good chance of breaking out. He might be one of the more expensive guys on this list to probably go by, so you might have a little bit of a tougher time. Again, if you don't play in a casual league. If you play in a casual league, maybe you could go get Garrett Wilson for cheap because people are a little bit disappointed in him. But he's another guy that is probably not going to be as bad as what his rankings suggest so far this year.
If there's anything that I've learned about George Pickens over the last couple of years, it's that the fantasy community, the dynasty community alike, everyone gives him the benefit of the doubt all the time. And anytime he scores more than 15 points, his price skyrockets. We just are coming off of a game where he dropped 16 against the Colts secondary. Who would have thought that would have happened? I don't know. Definitely not us. But with George Pickens, he's a guy that, again, halfway through the season, week 6, week 7, week 8, he can string together a couple games where he has, 15 plus points, and you're looking at him rest of season being ranked incredibly high by every single expert, by every single hardcore fantasy player. Everyone is in love with George Pickens, and they will never not be in love with George Pickens. And that alone is a reason to go and get him right now at price, because he still is pretty affordable. And he had, a slow start to the season in a poor offense where Justin Fields is a limited passer. But that said, as much as I believe that George Pickens' ceiling is capped, he has some really nice boom games. And that's what you need to be betting on when you're a desperate team. 1-3, 0-4 right now. You got to be hoping for the next couple of weeks. Maybe George Pickens will be able to string together a couple 20-point games. And at that point, he's helping you win some games when you are the most desperate just to get back to 500. right? Just to get back to 500. We can reevaluate his price now, but I mean, he is one of the highest upside guys that's going to be incredibly cheap at the moment.
J.K. Dobbins, we already mentioned, he had 20-point games to start the season, both of his first 2 games, and then 8 points and 9 points his last 2 games against tough teams. Has a bye this week, so you've got that going for you as well. Target J.K. I mean, target J.K. in a down tier. If you're down tiering from Justin Jefferson, get a high upside wide receiver and J.K. Dobbins. Again, you're filling 2 positions with high upside guys, which is what you need on an 0-4, 1-3 fantasy team. He's a perfect guy from a running back perspective to go and target right now because he does have the upside needed to perform at a high level for your fantasy team if he can stay healthy this season. So.
Yeah, and Rashid Shaheed is actually coming off of an 11-target game against Atlanta. This is something that we have literally never seen from him. He is very boom, very bust, gets 5 targets or less. He gets a touchdown or he gets pretty much nothing. And you're starting to see that target and opportunity increase for Shaheed. And that's kind of all the more reason for you to take a shot on him. If he can get like even 7 targets a game with the upside of scoring a touchdown every single week, which he's very capable of doing any given week, then that's another guy that you can just plug into your flex and hope that he can have a big week for you and put you over the hump, get you a couple dubs.
Raheem Mostert is a perfect example of a guy you could take a shot on because right now he's worth nothing. You can get him almost for free. He's in an explosive backfield that's going to get better when Tua does come back this season. Tua will be back this season. And with that backfield, who knows? He could start next week for the rest of the season. He could not play the rest of the season. Mm-hmm. He could be the running back 3 the rest of the season. Those guys are constantly getting injured, and they're constantly filtering in and out with each other. Mostert last year had a big role. This year so far, he didn't, and then he got hurt. But again, you just never know. It's dirt cheap. It's free. You take a shot on a guy with really high upside and really good offense. That's a good shot.
Yeah, an incredibly tough start to the season for the Tennessee Titans and for Calvin Ridley overall. You've seen DeAndre Hopkins have a productive game. You've seen Calvin Ridley have 25 points and then 8 points and 2 points. We'll see what he does tonight against Miami. We're recording it before that game. But look, he's got some better, more friendly matchups in the future here. I think he's going to be able to be a little more consistent, get some continued target volume and opportunity from Will Levis, and my voice will not stop cracking. But with Calvin Ridley, again, at this point, I'm willing to go ahead and get him at a discount when he was going preseason 6 rounds. I still think the talent is there. You saw that against a Jets secondary that he cooked and had like 2 touchdowns against. It's there. You just got to bet on Will Levis being a little bit more competent of a passer and just develop like slightly. Please.
So again, are these guys that we're going to recommend, hey, if you're a 2-2, a 3-1 team, a 4-0 team, are you going to go buy these guys? Probably not. You're probably not going to, unless you want really are chasing upside to like go and destroy your league, which I think is a good strategy. But these are targets specifically for, you have to approach these terrible fantasy teams, which I have at least one. I don't know if you have one, but I have at least one awful fantasy team that I just butchered the draft. And so you have to take risks. You have to go out on limbs and you have to make drastic moves to even have a chance at making the playoffs. 85% of the time, it's not going to work. Most of the time you draft a bad fantasy team, that's it. And if you're in a league where you can't really trade, you're probably in big trouble. That's you can really only trade your way out of a bad team.
Yep.
So keep those things in mind, but it's still worth trying to salvage your fantasy football season. And a lot of people who are 0-4 or 1-3 won't even be on YouTube looking for this video because they've already given up. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. I'm essentially the fantasy football Jimmy Valvano, right? Don't give up. Inspiring, right? I hope you're inspired. And I hope you subscribe because you're inspired.
Heck yeah.
Like and subscribe if you whatever. All right, cool. Appreciate you guys. See you later.